Ladies and gentlemen of the old world, I hope you guys are all doing well, and today my friends we're here with a new series on the channel where we will be ranking legendary lords from best to worst for every single faction. Now also note that this is going to be focusing on multiplayer because in campaign it varies pretty wildly, right? You have the campaign effects, you do also have their individual performance in battle, you have itemization, all sorts of stuff like that. So today's video is going to be focusing explicitly on multiplayer. Maybe somewhere way down the road we'll do one for campaign, but again, my knowledge does lie heavily in multiplayer. So for the first video, we are going to be doing it for the Sons of Sigmar, the Empire, probably my favorite faction to play in multiplayer and overall. I do also have an Empire army in tabletop. And as far as the strongest lord goes for this faction, so again, we're going to be going from strongest to weakest, hands down Volkmar the Grim. Volkmar the Grim is a character that there are going to be many circumstances in which you're losing a battle, but if Volkmar manages to survive, and let's just say they don't have like a true dedicated anti-large beat stick, you're just straight up going to win. Even if the bounce of power is like 60-40 in their favor, Volkmar is a hard carry character. He brings so much to the table. So firstly, he's incredibly tanky, right? He's got 100 armor. He regenerates using the Jade Griffin item, which does give him 8 HP per second. So there's a multitude of kind of layers of regeneration. His is pretty good. There's no conditions, right? So for him, he's going to be constantly healing. Whereas a character like Loki or Felheart, for some reason, bless his little soul there, he only heals when he's in combat, right? But Volkmar, just an absolute beast with his mustache. He's going to be healing 24/7 and just laughing it up while he's doing so. On top of that, Volkmar has very good mass, so it's very hard to kind of trap him in bad situations. So you would normally think, okay, we have Volkmar the Grim. How do we, stop him from running through all of our stuff and just causing havoc? Well, let's get some anti-large cavalry and surround him. Well, if you do that, he has a bound banishment spell, which he can cast pretty much on top of the cavalry. He can also use the Soulfire bombardments. He is very, very tough to lock down. Soulfire bombardment, of course, doing beautiful AoE damage. It doesn't require any winds of magic. It has infinite charges. Super, super crazy. So what else he brings to the table? He causes terror. The Empire does have terror via its monstrous griffin. So you have Karl Franz and Boris Todbringer, but Volkmar the Grim brings it on the ground in a pretty consistent platform that you don't have to worry about being sniped, right? Franz, a bit of a glass cannon. Toddy, a little bit less so, but they're both characters you don't really want in the thick of things for too long. Typically, they're cycle charging or picking their engagements, but Volkmar gives you that constant state of terror for your opponents on the ground. And now he's got all the bound, buffs, right? He's got the Grand Hammer of Sigmar to give melee attack, incredibly powerful in both the front line and cavalry fights. Grand Shield of Faith for ward save just all around him, and the Soulfire Bombardment. On top of that, he's got Divine Power, which adds a miscast chance, usually not worth bringing. I mean, it's okay. And then Benediction as well for leadership, which can be helpful depending on the matchup, especially against like vampire counts. But overall, Volkmar the Grim, just a hard carry character. I can't tell you how many games myself I've had where I'm like, oh, I'm losing this game. Then I'm like, oh, wait, Volkmar the Grim just suddenly killed Throt the Unclean. Of course, Throt would win in a straight up just long-term fight, but if it's like close enough, he can like win the game and terror out things. And then just, man, he is just so damn powerful. The amount of disruption he causes in the front line, the banishments on your opponent's missile pieces, the force multiplying effects on your own troops, and the terror routes, it's just insane with how tough he is to kill. So again, that's my speech. Volkmar the Grim, in my opinion, is hands down the strongest lord for the Empire in multiplayer, but coming in at number 2, not that far behind, honestly. I do think Karl Franz is an amazing lord. But Volkmar the Grim, just on a final note, he's a strong independent mustache, right? He can go in there. It doesn't matter what caster you bring. You don't need to bring anything with him, really. Generally, if you're bringing Volkmar, you just need to bring something to kill large, which Empire has. Demogryph Knights, handgunners, cannons, all that good stuff. So Volkmar is a much more independent character that doesn't skew your build in a certain way. Now onto Karl Franz. I think Karl Franz is the second best lord for the Empire. I think he's an absolute hard carry character as well. I think the Empire has some pretty cool lord options for sure. So Franz has a couple mount options. You, of course, I didn't even mention Volkmar has a horse. Yeah, but no, nobody ever uses that. He just got his war altar. He's got his pimp wagon. But for Karl Franz, he's got the warhorse, the Barded warhorse, the Imperial Pegasus, and Deathclaw. But you got to bring Deathclaw, man. Although I have seen horse Franz do okay in a couple circumstances with Deathhoof, his beloved horse. But Franz is great. He's got awesome force multiplying effects with Hold the Line, of course, which is pretty standard on Empire, those Empire leadership characters. But he's got Galmaraz and Reichland Runefang. Galmaraz is pretty insane. It gives him a bonus for Large of 16 and adds 50% armor-piercing weapon damage. So you stack that with Reichland Runefang, and suddenly he's rocking, upwards of 70 melee attack, and he has great leadership, and also Galmaraz is amplifying his damage overall. It's pretty insane. Franz can be used as a sniping character, which, lord sniping, character sniping, single entity sniping is one of the biggest ways to come back in a game you're losing, right? Like, you're behind, your opponent compromises your flank. All right, go with Franz, snipe their caster in like 2 or 3 hits, and you're back in the game. And Franz is a character that can really do that. A bit of a glass cannon, but I think it's made up for by his itemization, the Reichland Runefang and Galmaraz, and just overall, Franz has a great charge bonus, awesome weapon strength, very good melee attack, good leadership and armor, 90 speed. What's not to like? Franz is a great character, causes terror. And I've, again, like Volkmar, he's a character that there's been so many games with the Empire I've been losing, but he just is able to put that game on his back, rip out 4,000, 5,000 gold value. Again, you have to be more careful with him, though. Franz, pretty much, you always have to bring a Jade Wizard. If you don't bring healing for Franz, you're really not playing him correctly, and you will suffer a bit of a... I mean, there's some weird all-in builds with like a Deathcaster and just trying to snipe and goon, but he is a glass cannon. He, you wouldn't think so on paper, because like, yeah, okay, he's got 100 armor and whatnot, but really, like, with the mass changes that happened recently, if these type of characters get caught and surrounded, you're going to need a regrowth to buy some time for them to get some reinforcements, for his men to come to him, and for him to escape. So Franz, in my opinion, the number 2 lord for the Empire. Now, coming in at number 3 here in the kind of mid-tier as far as Empire lords go, this was a tricky one, but for me personally, this is my anecdotal experience. Some of you other Empire players may disagree, but I think Marcus Wolfhart is going to be number 3. He's going to be kind of the next best lord for me. Marcus is a little bit more linear and more matchup specific. He's not as good and as, like, you can bring Volkmar in almost every matchup, and same with, Franz, depending on the Air Force situation. Sometimes Franz you don't want to bring against factions that have Tempest or that will be likely to bring Tempest, but Marcus Wolfhart is also a character that can just hard win you games. If your opponent slips up, you have the Hunter Snare, you have the Focus Shot, and the Amber Bow. So you team up Amber Bow, Focus Shot with a Spirit Leech caster, and you can get a little bit cheeky if you want, bring like Spirit Leech and a Fireball caster, and just like, you can nuke things really hard. But even if you want to play more of like a general Empire style of play, a little bit more kind of standard, Marcus is great for that too. The fact that he has a big AoE snare really brings a lot to the table. That can help you in cavalry engagements, that can blunt your opponent's cavalry charges, that can allow you to snipe lords. Snares are just really, really good, right? And on top of that, his bow, usually you want characters like Marcus to snipe enemy lords and monsters. Well, Marcus does also have a balls deep bonus for his large. I believe on the tooltip it says 120, so I mean, that is no joke. When he's shooting a big monster, he will put them down pretty good. And really, if you bring Marcus with his ideal kit, so you cut the ability of the Fleet Foot, it's really not that good. You bring the Amber Bow, which I usually like to bring. He only costs 1,600, so he really does allow you to go a little bit wider. And Marcus is a character that, not as general as like Franz and Volkmar, but you can use him in a lot of matchups, and I do have him in some dedicated builds. There's some matchups in which I think Marcus is actually one of the best picks, even above Volkmar in certain circumstances. But more so, it's hard to say. Volkmar is just an absolute raid boss for sure. So there you have it, Marcus Wolfhart coming in at the 3rd on the pick list here. And now getting into the lower rung of the Empire Legendary Lords, we do have, this one was really hard, but honestly, I've had success with Boris Todbringer, right? I've had games where I'm like, okay, I don't want to bring a healer, but I want a big monstrous character. And, that kind of takes Franz out of the picture. Like, Franz without regrowth just feels a little bit funky to me, but then you can bring Boris. So Boris does have a couple great items. He has the White Cloak of Ulrich, which is quite good. It lowers melee attack by 9 nearby characters. He does also have Crush the Weak, which is a little bit conditional. It cannot target enemies nearby if their leadership is higher than 50, but if their leadership's low, kind of in a late game scenario, he's going to be lowering melee attack. It's like Walmart Marathi, really. It lowers melee defense and melee attack by 5 with Crush the Weak on top of the Cloak of Ulrich. That's another 9. So in total, they're going to be getting their melee attack put down by a relatively substantial amount, right? On top of that, he does have the good healing. He has a Midland Runefang, and Lokir watching this video crying another tear right now. But Lokir Fellheart, of course, has to be in melee, but Toddy doesn't. So he's flying around, he's healing. You make a mistake, right? You pull him back, you can heal. It's not the end of the world. He has a little bit less armor than Franz, I think. I think he has, 85 armor, a little bit weaker overall in combat stats, but he's just like a budget Franz that basically you can strip down. So just for comparison purposes, if you bring Toddy, cut Foe Seeker, Deadly Onslaught, bring Crush the Weak, Stand Your Ground, and his 2 items, he's 23, right? You bring Franz, on Deathclaw, you cut Foe Seeker. You can bring Foe Seeker too, but you get, let's say, his items. He's 26. So Franz is a little bit more expensive. And on top of that, he requires a healer. Whereas Toddy, for example, you can bring him. And then if you want to bring, a Deathcaster to go a little bit more sniping focused, let's say you're using a build without Demogryph Knights, so you don't need the extra healing. Again, you can open up an Amber Wizard to get Manticore summons. You can go Burning Head, and that's often where you see Toddy, is if you're in a matchup where you're like, okay, I want a Flying Monster Beatstick, but I also want Burning Head. That's where Toddy comes in, and he can do well. I do think Toddy is a good lord. He's certainly better than Rakarth. The fact that he has healing, I think, brings a lot to the table. And, a lot of these characters, they either have to be crazy good snipers, have access to healing via a Jade Wizard. And that really is a problem with like Lokir, Fellheart, and Rakarth and those type of characters, is they don't have that. Dark Elves really can only heal with like Soul Stealer and things like that, right? So that's why Marathi is pretty much just always picked. And Malekith has kind of fallen out of favor due to the weakness of dragons overall. But yeah, I think Boris Todbringer is a good lord. Just because he's, the 4th on this list in the direction of the weaker lords doesn't mean he's bad. But I think he's overshadowed, of course, by Franz. Volkmar, and Marcus Wolfhard, which is probably lore friendly in terms of Franz at least. So now getting on to the last gentleman here on this list. This one hurts my soul because I love being welcome to Estalia, and Balthazar Gelt is extremely niche. The only time you're really going to be seeing Gelt is for like Haggard, Archer, Plague of Rust type builds where you're trying to be extra cheeky. You know, for example, you bring Gelt, you get a bunch of archers, and then you can bring down something like, and kind of the cool variance of that is if you're playing like Vampire Coast, you're expecting a Crab Rush, you're playing a player who likes to do that. You can bring like archers and huntsmen and Plague of Rust, and the archers will be good against the guns and the zombies, and they'll also be good against monsters. But again, it's like you have handgunners, you have Franz, you have artillery pieces. Like I feel like the Plague of Rust isn't as pertinent in this faction, whereas with like High Elves, for example, if the High Elves had a Balthazar character, he took his his business over there, then suddenly the archers, Lothern Seaguard, all those shadow walkers, or excuse me, shadow warriors. Shadow walkers don't exist. Basically, the Plague of Rust would be a lot better. Oftentimes, you see Plague of Rust picked in the High Elf matchup versus heavy armor. But with the Empire, I feel like he's just a little bit out of place. And honestly, he's not bad. Like he's a really cheap, metal caster. You can cut him. All his spells here, you basically just get. Let's say you want to go for final transmutation sniping, you get him on Quicksilver. You cut the evasion, you just bring, metal shifting, you even cut metal shifting, and like with Staff of Valons. And he's like 1300 for like a fast mobile final transmutation bot, or you can cut that and go Searing Doom and Plague of Rust. But overall, I just feel like the Empire synergies with Lore of Life and Manticore summons and nets as well. Going a light wizard with handgunners is very, very strong. It also helps the Empire win cavalry engagements. And I feel like Balthazar Gelt just doesn't synergize with a lot of things the Empire likes to do. That's not to say he's a terrible character. It's just that I feel like the other lords are just all consistently better than Gelt in more matchups and just overall. So that's just my humble opinion. So guys, that is it. Let me know what faction you would like to see next. Again, just to reiterate this list, we have Volkmar the Grim as the most powerful lord, followed by Karl Franz, Marcus Wolfhard, Boris Todbringer, and Balthazar Gelt. And again, this is for multiplayer. We're not going to be doing a campaign in these videos for a little while. Maybe in Game 3, once that comes out and we do more campaign, we'll kind of hit that. But let me know your thoughts. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you Sons of Sigmar prefer Karl Franz over Volkmar? It was kind of close. But man, oh man, I've just been playing a lot of competitive games lately, and Volkmar has just been carrying so hard. So is Franz, though. It was a really, really tough decision, but I feel like Volkmar is like borderline overpowered a little bit. Like he's just so annoying to deal with and such a pain to play against too. Like I've been playing a lot of Skaven, and when Volkmar comes, I'm just like, oh my god, I have to deal with Volkmar again. It's just, whereas with Franz, I'm like, okay, he can mess me up, but there's counterplay, right? I can goon him, I can snipe him, I can trap him. Volkmar, like you try and trap him, you get bombarded, and good night, sweet prince. That mustache is going to be whispering you sweet dreams. But anyways, guys, hopefully you enjoyed that one. Let me know what faction you would like to see next. My expertise is pretty decent in a couple factions, but there's other ones I'm going to have to pull in some other resources. So if I do get some help from someone getting a list together, I'll let you know as well. But again, let me know what faction you'd like, and that's it. Thanks again for watching, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing these Sons of Sigmar broken down and analyzed, and we'll be back soon. Most likely the next one I think we'll do probably will be for either the Skaven or the Vampire Coast, or maybe the High Elves. I've been kind of dabbling in High Elves. All right, guys, take care, stay safe, avoid Nurgle's Plague, and Sigmar bless, man. Take care.